White Zombie, 1932. The era of the thrall. In the beginning, zombies weren't monsters you ran from. They were people you felt sorry for. This initial archetype was defined by the zombie, a concept born from the harrowing intersection of West African spiritualism and the brutal reality of slavery in colonial Haiti. Originally, the word nzumbi, or nzambi, referred to a soul or a spirit, but in the shadow of the plantation, the meaning shifted. The horror wasn't being eaten. It was the terrifying prospect of being enslaved even after death. Sounds disgustingly scary, doesn't it? To the people of Haiti, the zombie was a living thrall, a person whose soul had been stolen by a bokor, or a sorcerer. These victims were often drugged into a death-like coma with powerful neurotoxins, buried, and then exhumed to work as mindless, uncompensated labor. They were vacant, wide-eyed, and completely subservient, kept in a permanent state of delirium by a diet of zombie cucumbers known as datura that suppressed their will. In the 1930s, when these stories first reached the West, the cinematic zombies reflected this exact fear. They were silent, slow, and purely atmospheric figures whose tragedy lay in their loss of autonomy and the theft of their human essence. Night of the Living Dead, 1968, the birth of the ghoul. Then comes the big bang of the zombies. Before 1968, the dead stayed buried. But George Romero, the director of The Night of the Living Dead, changed the game by stripping away the sorcerer and making the transition biological and universal. The big innovation? Contagion. You die, you come back. Doesn't matter if a zombie bit you or if you just had a heart attack. Death is the trigger. The afterlife isn't heaven or hell anymore. It's stumbling around a farmhouse trying to eat your neighbors. These zombies are slow, clumsy, and falling apart at the seams, but that's what makes them terrifying. They don't need to be fast when there's nowhere left to run. 1 ghoul? Annoying. 10 ghouls? Problem. 100? You're basically already dead. You just don't know it yet. The ghoul sits firmly right of center on our spectrum. They're corpses, actual rotting meat, with zero personality, zero memory, and zero chance of going back to who they were. The only thing they remember how to do is eat. And honestly, they're not even good at that. They're just persistent. Dawn of the Dead, 1978. The consumerist swarm. 10 years later, Romero looks at his ghouls and thinks, what if I made them sad? Not scary sad, pathetic sad. These zombies shuffle into a shopping mall because that's what they did when they were alive. They're not hunting strategically. They're just following muscle memory like your dad wandering into Home Depot on a Saturday even though he has nothing to fix. The zombie hasn't physically evolved here. They're still slow, still stupid, still dead. But now we're realizing that the horde is the real nightmare. 1 zombie trips over its own feet. 1,000 zombies become a slow-motion tsunami of decay that never stops. You can barricade yourself in a JCPenney all you want, but eventually they're getting in. Not because they're clever, just because they literally have nothing else to do. This is when the zombie becomes a metaphor with teeth. We're watching creatures mindlessly consume because it's all they know how to do, and we're supposed to sit there and think, wow, that's deep, while someone gets their intestines ripped out. The 70s were wild. The horror shifted to the sheer number of them. The horde became a metaphor for mindless consumerism, showing that even in death, we are slaves to our habits. The Return of the Living Dead, 1985. The sentient hunger. And then someone said, what if zombies could talk? And ruined everything in the best possible way. These aren't Romero's sad mall walkers. These are punk rock zombies who can run, think, and most horrifyingly, feel pain. They eat brains specifically because being dead hurts, and brains are basically zombie Advil. Let's talk about how unfair this is. You shoot them in the head, they laugh at you. You blow them up, congrats, now you have 20 smaller zombies. They can use radios, they can strategize. One of them literally calls the police and says, send more paramedics, which is both hilarious and deeply messed up. These zombies are having a better time than you are, and they're actively rotting. The returned zombie is still far right on the spectrum, completely dead, completely transformed, but now they've got personality. They're not just mindless eating machines. They're miserable eating machines who can tell you exactly how much it sucks to be undead while they're chewing on your skull. It's like if someone gave a zombie an existential crisis and a sense of humor at the same time. This is where the brains trope comes from. These zombies were a massive departure because they were smart and talkative. They were also unkillable. Headshots just didn't work. Day of the Dead, 1985. The Tragic Learner. Romero comes back and says, actually, What if they're sad again, but in a different way? Enter Bub, the zombie who remembers how to salute. This is the first time we see a zombie do something that isn't eating or wandering, and it breaks your heart a little. He's still a rotting corpse, he still wants to eat people, but he can listen to music and recognize faces, and suddenly you're wondering if there's someone still in there. This era asks the uncomfortable question, what if they could come back? Not physically, they're still dead, but mentally. The zombie here shifts slightly left on the spectrum, which is somehow worse. It's one thing to kill a mindless monster, it's another thing entirely to kill a monster that looks at you like it used to be your friend. And maybe it was. The domesticated zombie is tragic, because it shows us the potential for recovery that will never actually happen. They're too far gone, but they're close enough that we feel guilty about it, which is probably the most 80s thing Romero ever did. Evolutionarily, this moved the zombie slightly back to the left on our spectrum. Resident Evil, 2002. The bioorganic weapon. The new millennium arrives and someone in a lab coat goes, what if we made zombies on purpose? The T-virus turns people into zombies, sure, but it also turns them into dogs with exposed muscles, giant mutant toads. And if you're really unlucky, a 7-foot-tall leather daddy with a rocket launcher for an arm. These aren't just zombies anymore. They're products. Umbrella Corporation is out here playing God, and accidentally creating a dozen different apocalypses at once. You've got your standard shambling zombie, but give it a few hours and it might sprout tentacles, or shed its skin and start licking people to death with a 15-foot tongue. The zombie becomes modular, customizable, a boss fight. The Resident Evil zombie sits all over the spectrum depending on how long it's been cooking. Fresh infection? Still kind of human. Give it a week in the lab? Congratulations, it's a tyrant now, and it's 12 feet tall. This is when zombies stop being a single type of creature and become an entire ecosystem of horrors, all sponsored by corporate negligence. Basically, science gone wrong. 28 days later, 2002, The Sprinter. If you want to argue about fast zombies, this is where you start. The one good thing about these creatures were that they were slow and you could outrun them. Then came the rage virus. Technically, these aren't zombies, they're just really, really angry people, but who cares? They run, they scream, they vomit blood on you. The slow shamble is dead, and in its place is a nightmare that can catch you even if you're in decent shape. The key difference here is that the infected are alive. They can starve, they can bleed out. You don't need a headshot, a solid punch to the throat works fine. But they're so fast and so violent that it doesn't matter. They're not trying to eat you, they're trying to make you like them, and they'll beat you to death to do it. The infected sit left of the undead on the spectrum because they're still biologically human. Their bodies work, their hearts beat. They've just lost everything upstairs. No memory, no personality, no humanity, just pure, unfiltered rage. It's like if someone turned road rage into a contagious disease and let it loose in London. The early 2000s were not okay. This part of the evolution here was pure adrenaline. The zombie was no longer a creeping shadow, but a heat-seeking missile of pure anger. Shaun of the Dead, 2004, the background noise. By 2004, we'd seen so many zombies that Edgar Wright was like, what if we just made fun of them? And somehow, it worked. These are Romero zombies. Slow, dumb, and easy to kill if you've got a cricket bat and decent hand-eye coordination. The evolution here isn't in the zombies themselves, it's in how we react to them. The zombie becomes mundane. They're a nuisance. You can mistake them for drunk people. You can keep one in your backyard like a weird pet. The apocalypse happens, and your biggest concern is still whether your ex-girlfriend likes you. The zombie is so ingrained in pop culture that we can laugh at it without losing the threat entirely. This is the zombie as white noise. They're still dangerous, they'll absolutely kill you if you're not paying attention, but they're predictable, boring even, which is exactly the point. Shaun of the Dead proved that zombies were flexible enough to survive satire, and that's when we knew they weren't going anywhere. I Am Legend, 2007. The Dark Seeker. Right after the light-hearted and satire zombies, things take a turn for the worse. The infected level up. These aren't mindless zombies. They're apex predators with a taste for drama. They hunt in packs, set traps, and mourn their dead, which is somehow more unsettling than if they just ate people and moved on. They're smart enough to be a society, but too far gone to be reasoned with. The Dark Seeker is what happens when the infected stick around long enough to adapt. They're still alive, technically, but they've become something new. They hate sunlight, they're insanely strong, and they figured out that if they work together, they can absolutely destroy the last guy on Earth who's trying to cure them. Rude. This zombie sits right of center but inching back left because they've retained just enough intelligence to be terrifying in new ways. They're not stumbling around moaning. They're planning. They're learning. They're basically if the infected from 28 days later went to college. And honestly, we should have just let them have the planet. This represented a shift toward global solitude. The idea that the infected had replaced us as the dominant species on Earth. They weren't just a horde anymore. They were a new, terrifying society. World War Z, 2013. The fluid mass. Zombies have always been stronger in numbers. This is where they come in a wave now. These infected move so fast and in such overwhelming numbers that they don't climb walls, they become the wall. They pile on top of each other like ants building a bridge, and suddenly Jerusalem has a tsunami of bodies crashing over its fortifications like a flesh avalanche. The World War Z zombie isn't scary because of what it can do alone. It's scary because there are 10 million of them, and they all want the same thing. You. They're fast, they're single-minded, and they operate like a hive organism. One zombie? Kill it. A swarm? Run? A swarm that can build itself into a ladder? Pray. This is the macro zombie. The global disaster. The extinction event. They're so far right on the spectrum that individuality doesn't even matter anymore. They're a force of nature, and you don't fight a hurricane, you just try not to drown. Train to Busan, 2016. The kinetic predator. The fast zombie reaches its final form. These infected don't just run, they hurl themselves at you with broken necks and dislocated limbs, twisting midair like possessed gymnasts. They're 100% commitment, 0% self-preservation. They'll throw themselves off buildings if they think it'll get them closer to biting your face. Train to Busan perfected the speed and violence formula. These zombies are relentless, aggressive, and horrifying to watch because they move wrong. They're still human-shaped, but everything about them is broken. They're the infected from 28 days later if someone gave them Red Bull and took away their bones. They're left of undead, but right of thrall. Still flesh and blood, still technically alive, but so transformed that there's no coming back. The zombie here isn't a metaphor. It's a predator, and you're prey. That's it. That's the relationship. Run faster. 28 years later, the present. The mature ecosystem. As we look at the latest representations, we're seeing the long-term apocalypse. We aren't looking at the initial breakout anymore. We're looking at how the infected have settled into the environment. Decades after Rage, the infected have settled in. They're not the screaming sprinters from the first outbreak. They're weathered, adapted, evolved. Some have rotted down to husks. Some have formed packs with hierarchies. Some have survived long enough that we're watching natural selection happen in real time. The 2020s want complicated zombies. We've done fast, slow, smart, and dumb. Now we're asking, what happens when the apocalypse becomes normal? The infected aren't an outbreak anymore. They're the environment. They're part of the landscape like wolves or bears, except worse. This zombie is post-apocalypse personified. The zombies here represent a permanent change to the world's biology. A world where humans are no longer the top of the food chain, and the infection has become a weathered, permanent part of the landscape. They've been here so long that they're not the disaster. They're what comes after. And that might be the scariest evolution yet. Because the infected didn't destroy the world, they survived the end of us. And in horror, that's what it looks like when demons win. Watch our next video, When Demons Win. The most disturbing horror endings explained in 10 minutes. See you there.